It was supposed to be the happiest day of my year, moving into our dream home, finally settling into a quiet, upscale neighborhood we'd worked so hard to afford. But instead of a warm welcome, we got flashing lights, loud accusations, and a woman screaming about violations from across the street. We hadn't even finished unloading the second box when she made her grand entrance. She stormed over with a clipboard in hand, snapping pictures of our moving truck like she was some kind of self-appointed detective. Within minutes, the cops pulled up, all because Karen from the HOA claimed we were disturbing the peace and violating move-in protocol. We were stunned. I mean, who calls the police on someone for moving into their own house? But this wasn't just a neighbor with a bad attitude. Karen, as we later found out, had a history of harassing new residents, making up rules, fining people over garden gnomes, even threatening kids for playing too loudly on the sidewalk. And she wasn't just in the HOA. She was the HOA president, at least until everything started to unravel. What she didn't realize was that her little stunt that day would set off a chain reaction. What started with a false police call would end with an official investigation, a community uprising, and the biggest twist this quiet street had ever seen. One that cost her not just her position, but her million-dollar home. And trust me, that's not even the wildest part. So if you've ever dealt with an out-of-control HOA or a power-hungry neighbor who just couldn't mind their own business, you're going to want to stick around. Because what happened next, no one, not even Karen, saw it coming. So after the cops left that day, clearly realizing it was a waste of their time, we figured that was the end of it. Just a rocky start with a grumpy neighbor, right? We tried to laugh it off. My wife and I even joked about baking her cookies as a peace offering. But that hope died the very next morning. I woke up to a warning notice taped to our front door. It claimed we had illegally parked a commercial vehicle on the street. She meant our moving truck, which was gone by then. The notice was signed by the HOA board. Or rather, just Karen. Turns out, she ran the board by herself after the other members had either resigned or moved away. That should have been a red flag right there, but we didn't know any of this yet. Over the next few days, things escalated fast. We got notes about our grass being half an inch too long. She emailed us about our trash bins being visible for more than 15 minutes, and then came the fines. First $50, then $150. And then one that said we owed $300 for violating the neighborhood aesthetic, whatever that means. Every single complaint traced back to Karen. Curious and honestly a bit fed up, I started talking to other neighbors. That's when the stories started pouring in. One guy told me she tried to fine him for having a Halloween wreath up too early. A mom down the block said her daughter wasn't allowed to draw chalk on their driveway because it was considered graffiti. One family even moved out early just to get away from her constant harassment. But something felt off. Like maybe there was more behind Karen's behavior than just a love for rules. And as we started digging deeper into the HOA records, that's when we found something no one expected. At first, we just wanted to understand how someone like Karen had so much power in the neighborhood. But the deeper we looked, the messier it got. We requested access to the HOA's meeting minutes and budget reports, something we had every right to do as new residents, and that's when things started getting shady. Most of the records were incomplete, and the ones that were available looked like they'd been edited or rewritten entirely. No signatures, no board member votes, just Karen's name on everything. When I asked the HOA's management company about it, they told me they'd stopped working with our neighborhood over a year ago. Didn't make sense. Karen had told us they were still under contract. It was like peeling back layers of a rotten onion. The more we uncovered, the more it became clear. Karen had been running the HOA like her own personal kingdom, unchecked, for months. Then came the side conversations. One neighbor, retired military, told me he tried to run against her last year and suddenly got cited for unauthorized exterior lighting. Another neighbor, a single dad, said his application to build a backyard shed got denied after he declined to vote for her in a community survey. None of this was adding up unless you believed that Karen had been using HOA rules to punish anyone who challenged her. Meanwhile, the fines against us kept stacking up. Karen even started emailing us at 3 a.m. with blurry photos of our porch. Light left on overnight, saying it was a disturbance to community rest. My wife was losing sleep. Our kids were scared to ride their bikes outside. It was no longer just about moving in. This had become a full-blown conflict. But just when we thought things couldn't get worse, we discovered something buried in the public records that turned everything upside down. And from that moment on, it wasn't just about Karen anymore. The public records we found weren't just a smoking gun. They were a full-on alarm bell. Buried deep in county filings, there was a string of documents showing Karen had filed several amendments to the HOA bylaws. But none of them had ever been properly recorded with homeowner signatures. Legally, those changes had no weight, which meant the fines, the threats, the so-called violations, they were built on rules that didn't even officially exist. That changed everything. We printed copies of everything we found and started going door to door. Most neighbors had no clue what Karen had been doing behind the scenes. When they saw the documents, the forged signatures, the overlapping dates, their reactions were all the same: shock, then anger. One neighbor, who'd paid nearly $1,000 in fines over the past year, nearly broke down. She said Karen had made her feel like a prisoner in her own home. But even with the truth coming out, Karen didn't back down. In fact, she doubled down. We got a certified letter threatening legal action for community defamation. She sent an urgent emergency meeting notice to every home, claiming our family was trying to take over the HOA through intimidation. That night, two of her supporters, one of whom later admitted Karen promised him a seat on the board, started putting up flyers around the neighborhood, painting us as the villains. The community was now divided. Half the neighbors rallied with us, furious over the manipulation. The other half were either afraid to speak up or still under Karen's spell. The tension was thick. People were whispering in driveways. Arguments broke out in the Facebook group. A few homeowners even mentioned calling local news. And just when it felt like everything was about to boil over, we received an envelope, not from Karen this time, but from the county attorney's office. That's when we knew the storm was coming. At first, we thought the envelope from the county attorney's office was just confirmation that someone had finally taken notice of Karen's misconduct. Maybe it was a warning or a sign that her fake HOA rules were catching up to her. But when I opened it, my heart dropped. It wasn't about Karen, it was about us. According to the letter, a formal complaint had been filed against me for willful disruption of a legally established homeowners association. Karen had twisted the narrative again, but this time she'd managed to push it to a county-level complaint. Now we weren't just dealing with annoying emails or late-night flyers. We were being investigated. I was furious. I had spent weeks uncovering the truth, helping neighbors, pulling together documents, and somehow we were the ones facing official scrutiny. The timing couldn't have been worse. The neighborhood was already on edge, and this just made everything more chaotic. But then came the second twist, one that not even Karen saw coming. While sorting through more of the HOA documents we had collected, one of our neighbors, a retired accountant who had joined our efforts, noticed a string of payments made from the HOA's reserve fund. The amounts were small enough to avoid suspicion, but they were regular, and they all led back to a landscaping company registered under a completely different name. After digging a little more, he uncovered that the business was actually owned by Karen's cousin, and that she'd been approving monthly payments to them for nearly 2 years without any competitive bids or service records. It suddenly became clear. This wasn't just power tripping. It was personal gain, fraud, misuse of HOA funds. And now, with money involved, the stakes skyrocketed. Neighbors who'd been quiet started speaking up. People who once defended Karen were now questioning everything. But Karen, she wasn't backing down. In fact, she was planning one final move that would change everything. And none of us were prepared for how far she'd go. The night of the emergency HOA meeting felt like something straight out of a movie. Nearly every household showed up, even people who hadn't spoken in months. Some brought lawn chairs. Others stood with their arms crossed, waiting to see what Karen would say. She showed up late, wearing a blazer and holding a thick folder, acting like nothing had happened. Her voice was steady, but the cracks in her confidence showed. She started by accusing me and a few others of spreading false information, insisting that every payment, every rule, every fine was within her authority. That's when we played our card. One of our neighbors, who worked as a paralegal, stood up and calmly listed every shady payment from the HOA funds with documentation. Then we presented an email chain showing Karen had approved her cousins' landscaping contracts with no other bids and no board oversight. There were gasps, whispers, people shaking their heads. Karen tried to cut us off, calling it a witch hunt. But no one was buying it anymore. And then the final blow came. The county attorney's office rep, who we didn't even know had been watching the meeting from a distance, stepped forward. He announced that based on recent findings and the official complaint from multiple homeowners, Karen was being removed from her position pending further legal review. A formal audit of the HOA's finances was already underway. Everyone froze. Karen stood there in silence, her face pale. She didn't argue. She didn't say a word. She just turned, grabbed her folder, and walked out. In the weeks that followed, the truth unraveled even more. Turns out her $1.2 million home had been quietly listed as collateral for a personal loan tied to the phony landscaping company. When the fraud came to light, the bank stepped in. She lost the house, completely gone. But here's the twist. Just when we thought it was over, we got a letter from her attorney. Karen had filed paperwork to sue the HOA, claiming she was the victim all along. At first, the lawsuit she filed felt like one final desperate move, but nobody took it seriously. The new HOA board, now made up of actual residents elected fairly, reviewed the claim with a legal team. It didn't take long for the case to fall apart. Her arguments were vague, full of contradictions, and completely ignored the evidence stacked against her. Within weeks, the suit was dismissed, and just like that, Karen was out of our lives for good. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal. The toxic atmosphere lifted. People started chatting at the mailbox again. Kids played outside without fear of being reported, and for the first time in years, the HOA meetings felt open and honest. We created a transparent budget, updated the outdated rules, and formed a rotating volunteer board so no one person could take over again. As for us, we finally unpacked that last moving box. It took months, but we felt at home. What started as a nightmare, move-in turned into a community coming together not just to stand up to one person, but to fix something broken. It reminded all of us why people move into HOA neighborhoods. In the first place, not for power, but for peace, safety, neighbors who actually look out for one another. And yeah, there are still a few garden gnome debates and lawn height discussions, but now they come with a smile and a friendly chat, not a fine or a threat. So if you ever find yourself dealing with an out-of-control HOA or a Karen with a clipboard, remember, you're not stuck. You can stand up, speak out, and sometimes even help rebuild something better. Because in the end, the strongest community isn't built on rules, it's built on people.